This is the Unicus Radio Network.
Sound for your soul, your soul, your soul, your soul, your soul, your soul.
From beyond the Twilight Zone, past the outer limits of reality, you're listening to the Unicus Radio Hour with your host, Robert Stanley.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Unicus Radio Hour. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. It's a pleasure to be with you again. I hope you're doing well. It's a terrific Tuesday, December 3rd, 2013. You tired of paying high prices for gasoline? Well, we're going to get into that tonight. I know I'm tired of it. I'll bet you are too. We'll see what we can do about that, okay? If you'd like to call in, the area code is 202-607-9935. Again, that phone number, if you're in North America, it is 202-607-9935. Or you can Skype me at Unicus Editor. That's spelled UNICUS Editor. And I am getting your emails also at editor@unicusmagazine.com. Our special guest this evening is David Blume, and his website is alcoholcanbeagas.com. And David's leading a very interesting life. In 1978, he was actually employed by NASA to work on an experimental solar self-sufficient energy sewage treatment desalination plant, the Virgin Islands. And he was able to solve many previously persistent problems in the system, and then he went to work for the Mother Earth News Eco Village in North Carolina, where he worked in a team using alternative building techniques. While there, he constructed a number of unique structures. And then when the energy crisis struck in 1978, Dave started the American Homegrown Fuel Company, Incorporated. It's an educational organization teaching farmers and others how to produce and use low-cost alcohol fuel at home or on the farm. Alcohol is a renewable and virtually pollution-free fuel. It's used in place of gasoline in automobile engines. And so David is the author of a book, fantastic book, Alcohol Can Be a Gas. He's also got a DVD out. He does workshops. He's obviously a very busy man, but we were fortunate enough to get him on the show tonight. David, welcome to the program.
Well, glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing such good work. I mean, I barely scratched the surface of your bio here, but it's pretty amazing that you've been doing this for a while, and I bet you most people don't even know this is possible.
Well, it's true. You know, the idea that alcohol can run a car is seen as some new idea.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't as if there was this big pool of gasoline sitting around and someone said, wish we had an engine that would run on that. Alcohol was the first fuel for internal combustion engines long before gasoline was even a gleam in Rockefeller's eye.
Uh-huh.
And, this entire country ran on alcohol. In fact, the whole world ran on alcohol for a long time before gasoline became available. So it's not a new idea, but it's been an idea that has been fought for over 100 years by the oil companies because they can't control who makes alcohol. I mean, after all, this is moonshine we're talking about.
Yeah.
And people have been making moonshine for thousands of years. So it's not like oil where you need a very high-tech refinery to produce the products. We can use some moderately sophisticated technology to very efficiently produce our own alcohol fuel for less than $1 a gallon.
Wow.
And that has been a long and bitter history between farmers and the oil companies.
You know, one of the things I noticed, David, is if you try and store gasoline currently, it gums up to the motor. It's horrible. I'm not sure if they put additives in there or what. How is that? Is alcohol something that once it's refined, it can be stored for a period of time safely?
Well, they've opened bottles of gin that were bottled back during the Roman Empire, and they were still quite tasty. So I think, yes, you can store alcohol a very long time. Now, I talked to the quality control executive at Exxon, and he said that if they don't sell gasoline within 30 days from the station, they pump it back out and bring it back to the refinery, because what's in gasoline is all the garbage byproducts from making everything else out of oil. I mean, you can make linoleum, you can make you can make fiberglass resin, you can make pesticides, you can do all these things with oil.
Right.
But about half of the oil ends up as waste products, and that's what they throw together and call gasoline.
Wow.
So there's over 400 or 500 different chemicals in there on any given day. Some of them are really volatile and boil at just about room temperature, and others don't even boil till 450 degrees, that gum stuff you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So gasoline sits, the volatile stuff evaporates away, and leaving nothing but the tar and varnish. And so that, of course, would coat the inside of your gas tank and gum up your injectors and all that. So they need that extra volatile stuff to balance out the almost asphalt-like stuff they stick in gasoline. So it's really, when you think about it, what we're doing is we're paying top dollar to dispose of the oil company's toxic waste.
Sorry,
because
it's not funny.
Yeah, you're only talking about 70 cents a pound or 80 cents a pound at the most for gasoline, and they make $10, $20, $50, $80 a pound on all their products that they make from. So, gasoline is really, it would otherwise be a really big, expensive disposal problem for them if we weren't so kind as to buy it and burn it in our cars.
Yeah, and breathe it in, obviously, too. That's looking at your website here, alcoholcanbeagas.com, I was blown away. It says alcohol is a superior fuel to gasoline. It's 105 octane, which I really didn't know that. It burns much cooler, creates less vibration, is less flammable in case of an accident, is 98% pollution-free, has lower evaporative emissions, and deposits no carbon in the engine or oil, resulting in a tripling of engine life. Specialized alcohol engines can get at least 22% better mileage than gasoline or diesel? Really?
Yeah, we developed that technology here in the United States under DOE contract. And what happens is if you take advantage of alcohol's superior characteristics rather than just getting it to work in a gasoline engine, which is obviously optimized for gasoline, you can get some great results. 105 octane means you can squeeze the fuel into a much smaller space before you ignite it. That's high compression, as they call it. Diesel engines do that, and in fact, they don't even need a spark plug because they squeeze fuel so much that it reaches a point where it auto-ignites or just explodes.
Right.
So alcohol has characteristics that are kind of like diesel, but also like gasoline. And so when you engineer an engine to take advantage of those, you actually, gallon for gallon, get 22% more mileage from alcohol than you do from fossil fuels. So in China, they're now building these engines. They're using them in big buses and in dump trucks and all kind of applications that need a really large amount of power, and start and stop a lot. And, once again, we invent the technology and people around the world get it first rather than ourselves because our oil companies are really not very happy about this.
Well, they must have done a real number in the school system because I don't remember ever reading anything about this. And number 8 on your list here really blew my mind as I was reading it. It says gasoline, as you said, is refineries' toxic waste. Alcoholic fuel, or alcohol as a fuel, is a liquid sunshine. And all of Henry Ford's early cars were flex fuels. It wasn't until gasoline magnate John D. Rockefeller funded Prohibition that alcohol fuel companies were driven out of business. I'd never heard that. It makes a ton of sense. Really, during Prohibition, they weren't allowed to make alcohol for fuel?
Well, Prohibition, from Rockefeller's point of view, was not about drinking. It was about getting rid of the competition. At the time, about half the country ran on alcohol and half the country ran on gasoline.
Okay.
And so basically, Rockefeller decided to stop competing with the farmers and just knock them out. So he went and found a little old bunch of ladies called the Women's Christian Temperance Movement.
Yeah.
And, they were the ones who would go into bars with an umbrella and beat people about the head saying, lips that touch alcohol will never touch mine, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't have any chance of getting, any kind of laws against drinking passed until Rockefeller gave them $4 million back in the early 1900s. That would be like giving somebody $400 million nowadays to pass a piece of legislation.
Yeah.
And so money talks, and here's this hard-drinking, all-male Congress. Well, there was one woman from Wyoming, but she drank as much as the rest of them. And they passed prohibition, which in theory meant nobody could drink anything. Well, of course, it didn't have any effect on people's drinking habits.
Right.
But it totally knocked out alcohol as a legitimate fuel in the marketplace, and that's when the United States went over to gasoline as its standard. And not until the early 30s was prohibition repealed.
Well, that's crazy. But by that time, I guess the companies, the alcohol refiners, were out of business, and why didn't they come back?
Well, they did come back.
Okay.
I mean, as soon as it became legal to make alcohol again, one of the reasons why they came back is Democrats said, our farmers, are starving out there. They need a way of turning their farm product into something for money because we're overflowing with wheat and we're overflowing with corn, which is, of course, is similar to today. And when there's a surplus of something, well, the price goes down, and farmers were not able to get enough money for their crops. So to soak up those surpluses, the Democrats proposed that we start making alcohol again, and of course that swept. By that time, people were really fed up with prohibition and swept the Republicans out of office. So alcohol started getting made again, and all over the country there were alcohol stations. There was the Gasohol Company, the Agrol Company, Alco Gas Company. There were many, many companies. In fact, the Agrol Company had over 2,000 stations up and down the Mississippi in the Midwest. But the oil companies needed to put this genie back in the bottle. They had to get alcohol out of business again. So they did something that is very reminiscent of something that's happening right now. What they did at the time was took advantage of the first media saturation bombing. In other words, they went out there, and there was no internet, none of that kind of stuff. There was only radio and print, and they sent a press release to every single radio station and print media outlet on the same day. This took tens of thousands of runners to be running these press releases around, not even in the mail. And what the press release said was, the Agrol Company was not supporting American farmers. It was actually buying Caribbean molasses to make its alcohol and cheating the American farmer from its rightful profits in the alcohol industry. Well, not a word of that was true. It was completely false. But everywhere you turned, you could read that and hear that. And back then, people were a little less cynical about the media than they are now. And everyone believed it, and in 30 days, the Agrol business was bankrupt. Everybody boycotted them for being unpatriotic and anti-farmer, and that the whole thing was fabricated by the forces of the American Petroleum Institute, or the API. Now, today, I mean this minute, the API has contracted with the Associated Press, the AP, to put out stories against alcohol right now, because right now, we're talking about, at the end of the year, an increase in the renewable fuel standard. Every year, the standard goes up and says more of our fossil fuels have to be replaced with renewable fuels. And the oil companies are really upset because now we're really cutting into their meat. Before they didn't really care. It was just a few percent here and there. But now it's starting to come up to something substantial, well more than 10%. And they recently lost a huge court case in the Supreme Court where they tried to limit the amount of alcohol and gas, and the Supreme Court said to the oil companies, you guys are just a business, and we're the government. It's like we tell you what to do. I know it seems weird. You're used to having your way all the time, but, you can't restrict the amount of alcohol that states want to put in their gas. And so the EPA came out with a study saying it's perfectly safe all the way up to 30% alcohol, and all the gas in the United States pretty much has 10 to 15% in it right now. So this is like, all hands are like battle cry for the American Petroleum Institute, but they always work behind a front because everyone hates the oil companies. So they went to the Associated Press and are having them print stories in all the print media in the United States about how alcohol is a bad idea and it's this and it's that. And you can't really find anyone today who hasn't heard some story recently about alcohol being bad for something or other. And so whenever you hear one of these stories, you have to ask yourself, how am I being manipulated against my own best interest? Because nobody spends the billions of dollars like the API to trash alcohol because it's true. They spend those billions of dollars to make the truth, to create propaganda. And so that's what we're facing nowadays. And I'm just pointing out to you that historically this was done before to the Agrol company in the alcohol movement of the 30s. So there's been several times in a nation's history where alcohol has risen from the dead, has become popular, and once again was one way or another beaten back by the oil companies. But the difference this time is that we actually are running out of easy-to-get-at oil.
Mm-hmm.
The nice black liquid stuff that we can make into oil with very little cost and drill and pump at very little cost. Well, we've been doing that a long time, and the easy stuff is gone.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, look at the Deepwater Horizon.
Oh, God.
Those fools were going a mile beneath the surface of the ocean to drill 4 more miles into the crust of the earth to get at oil. That's desperate. That's sheer desperation in trying to get some oil to keep their dynasty going, because there's no way in the world that stuff would ever be cost effective. And but the thing the oil companies fear most is any actual competition in the marketplace. And alcohol, we can make it for $30, $40 a barrel.
Yeah.
And this expensive oil, which we're making from tar sands in Canada, we're having to drill miles beneath the Earth's surface in the Gulf, you're looking at $150, $200, $250 a barrel stuff. And the only way they can sell that to us is to convince us of Tina. There is no alternative.
Huh.
So if they can keep delaying us from making alcohol until at some point they say, oh, by the way, we were just kidding when we said we had all that oil underneath Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
We really don't, and so now you're going to have to empty your treasury and pay us to go ahead and turn this goo in the sands of Canada into something sort of like oil so that we can then refine it into oil so then we can sell it to you and you'll like it. So the whole name of the game right now with alcohol around the world for the oil companies is delay, 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 misinformation, misdirection, confuse the public, when there's really no evidence that any of the things they're saying are true. But if you have a big enough bullhorn like the American Petroleum Institute, well, you can really confuse people.
Yeah, I'll say I am a little confused about the difference between ethanol and alcohol, and why, if alcohol is so superior, why did they even go the route of ethanol?
Well, ethanol is alcohol.
Okay.
There are many things called alcohol,
All right.
And ethanol is one sort of alcohol. I try not to use the word ethanol because the oil companies have spent, several $1 billion tarnishing that word. Mm-hmm. So alcohol is what it is. Ethanol is a fancy chemical term for the kind of alcohol it is, but it's really just moonshine. Now, it's 200 proof moonshine. It's pure moonshine, but it is the very same thing that you guys have in your vodka tonics. If you make alcohol from potatoes, well, that's vodka. If you make alcohol from grapes, that's brandy. But if the alcohol is the same, it's just the little impurities that give it flavor that give the name to the beverage.
Okay, so maybe I'm confusing with methanol?
Methanol is another kind of alcohol which is made from natural gas.
Oh.
And methanol is sometimes called wood alcohol, and it can be made by taking a bunch of woody stuff, putting it in a closed container without air, and heating it up. And what gets driven off is methanol and some other chemicals, and that's a different kind of alcohol. It's extremely toxic. Drinking it will typically destroy your liver, destroy your eyes. Even though it's an alcohol, it's a very different alcohol, and it's really, really quite toxic. Ethanol, on the other hand, well, it's edible. So it's very, very different than methanol. In fact, when you burn ethanol, or the kind of alcohol we're talking about, it's 98% pollution-free. And when you say pollution-free, what that means is the three big chemicals. Carbon monoxide, which is, Dr. Kevorkian's death gas. If you breathe it, it soaks up all the places where oxygen's supposed to go in your cells, and then you end up suffocating. Then there's, of course, hydrocarbons, the microscopic soot that comes out of the exhaust pipe, and breathing that into your lungs can cause emphysema and all kinds of other problems. And then there's nitrous oxides, the brown stuff in smog. So those are the three pollutants we measure when we measure the toxics coming out of the exhaust pipe of a car. Mm-hmm. Alcohol, on the other hand, well, for instance, in the case of my little Ford Ranger, when I go in and I have them test it, I never tell them I'm running on alcohol because it's just so amusing. So they stick the probe in the tailpipe, and you see them look at their smog machine, and you see them look at their smog machine, and you see them look at their smog machine. And then you notice they do one of several things because the needles aren't moving. And, when you've got something electronic that isn't working, you probably use the standard diagnostic technique of banging on the top of it, to see if it shakes something loose. And that doesn't work, so they usually peek their head over the top and look to see if the thing's plugged in or not. But none of the needles are moving, right?
Yeah.
And so they can't believe that the stuff is this clean. So the actual final readings on my truck were 0 parts per million carbon monoxide. So 0 poisonous gas. 0 parts per million hydrocarbons, so no soot. And then 4 parts per million nitrous oxides, the brown stuff in smog.
Yeah.
But my car was allowed 400 parts per million by law. So
wow.
I was 99% cleaner than what was allowed by law. And in the other two cases, I was infinitely cleaner. So alcohol is really good for the environment, but what it does for your car is what's amazing. I just changed my oil recently after 25,000 miles.
What?
That's right. You're supposed to change your oil every 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 miles, depending on your car.
Yeah.
But when you pulled the dipstick out of my car, it still looked like new oil. There was no blackness to the oil whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
That's that hydrocarbon I was talking about. Remember hydrocarbons are one of the pollutants. Well, the inside of your engine is completely covered with carbon from the unburned gasoline. But in the case of alcohol, it burns so completely that there's no carbon on the inside of your engine. Your oil doesn't get fouled.
Mm.
And alcohol burns 300 degrees cooler than gasoline, so you don't overheat your oil and break down your oil.
Oh.
So engines running on alcohol typically last 3 times as long as they do on gasoline.
Well, now, I know when I go fill up my car, it says 10% ethanol or something in the gasoline already. So why not just go the rest of the way?
Oh, well, the oil companies don't want you to do that. I mean, that would... I mean, one of the things that people need to know is that with the car's current computer, it's a pretty smart thing, the car's computer. It can adjust for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And air-fuel mixture is different for alcohol than it is for gasoline. That's because gasoline is a hydrocarbon, meaning it has hydrogen and carbon in it. It needs oxygen from the air to burn.
Mm-hmm.
But alcohol has hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen in it. So it's a little different. And when you burn something that has oxygen contained within it, it burns completely.
Right.
So alcohol burns with practically an invisible flame, and it burns without any carbon. So alcohol ends up being the superior fuel when it comes to running in your car. And you may have seen this, like at the Indy 500, where they race on ethanol, or the same kind of alcohol we're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's no plumes of smoke coming out of the exhaust of these gigantic, multi-hundred horsepower cars because alcohol burns so completely clean.
Gosh, I didn't ever think about that. So why did they started putting some alcohol in our gasoline?
Well, we used to have something called the what was it called? The clean air. It was a clean air requirement, and so we had to put something. Well, I'll tell you what. You see, you know what the Grand Canyon is, right? It's this very, very deep valley.
Yeah.
And in the bottom is the Colorado River. So there used to be these very weird incidences in the 60s where people would be riding their motorboats down there in the bottom of the Colorado River, and all of a sudden some guy would just die and keel over right out of his boat. And what was happening was the carbon monoxide was building up in the bottom of the Grand Canyon because it's heavier than air, and people would eventually breathe enough where it would kill them and they'd keel over dead. So,
wow.
So this was a bad thing.
Yeah.
But there's other kinds of canyons, you see. Think about skyscrapers, tall buildings downtown in cities. Those are valleys too.
Yeah.
And so inner city kids were having really low learning scores because they were breathing carbon monoxide and not getting enough oxygen to their brain. So the Clean Air Act said, you really got to clean this up. And so they added alcohol to the gasoline, and the oxygen in the alcohol helped make sure that there was very little carbon monoxide in the exhaust. So we added alcohol to gasoline to try to clean up the worst of its pollution. But that's why the 10% is there. But at the pump today, we also sell 85% alcohol. In other words, darn near pure alcohol. There's a little bit of gasoline still in it. So in many, many cars, millions of cars are on the road, built at the factory in Detroit, able to run on pure alcohol or run on gasoline. Those are called flex fuel cars.
Right.
Now, you noted at the start of the show that Henry Ford's Model T was the original flex fuel car. Mm-hmm. In other words, you could go from alcohol to gas and back again without ever leaving your position behind the wheel of the car. You'd turn a knob on the dash that would adjust the air-fuel mixture. So in other words, like our computer does nowadays.
Yeah.
And you also could tune the car differently by pushing a lever on the steering column, which is the ignition timing. And that's all handled by computer nowadays.
Yeah, right.
So back then, the only computer was the gray stuff between your two ears, and you'd listen to the engine and you'd make the adjustments. So you could leave the city on Rockefeller's gasoline and stop by virtually any farm, because almost every farm had a small distillery, because alcohol is very useful for many things.
Right.
And you could buy alcohol, put it in the tank, make those two adjustments in just a moment, and drive back to town. So that's flexible fueling, where you can use both kinds of fuel. We've been making those cars since '94 in the United States, and most people don't even know they exist. And we have 2,000 stations in the United States that sell 85% alcohol at the pump that flex fuel cars can use. So if you go to my website, alcoholcanbeagas.com, we have a station finder application up in the corner where you can find out where the closest alcohol station is to where you live. I drove all the way from Dearborn to San Francisco, California, and I never bought gasoline once with a nice Ford F-150 they gave me to drive. And all I had to do was follow my own station finder and plan ahead where I knew alcohol would be for sale, and then I could buy it there. And so, really almost no one is completely out of range of getting alcohol, even though it's not everywhere it should be yet. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a flex fuel vehicle. You go, I don't have one of those, so how could I use alcohol? It turns out that the car you're driving today, with its smart little computer running its fuel injection system, is capable of running up to 50% alcohol without any changes whatsoever.
Wow.
I want that to sink in, okay? The car you're driving now is also an alcohol car at up to 50% alcohol. So you can put both in your tank. Go to a station that has alcohol and gasoline for sale, put half a tank of one and half a tank of the other, and voila, half your fuel is now not from the Middle East. Half your fuel is now from farmers in the Midwest. You know, half the money you're spending on your fuel is not going, you know, to places you'd rather not see it go.
Yeah.
In fact, it's going into your own community. So, so you can do this right now. You can go ahead and put alcohol in your tank by just finding a station on my website. Alcohol can be a gas. Start, you know, convince yourself slowly. Put in 1 gallon the first time you fill up of alcohol, and you'll notice that nothing changes. Runs just fine. You know, and next time put in 2 gallons and keep doing that until you get up to 50%. Now, the EPA, much to the consternation of the oil companies, tested all the vehicles back to 2001,
right.
2001, which is 80% of the vehicles on the road today. And they found that every single one of them would run on at least 30% alcohol. So the EPA just won a lawsuit with against the oil companies, against the American Petroleum Institute, and they are now calling for making 30% alcohol mandatory in the whole United States. And the oil companies are freaking out.
So instead of 10%, you're saying upping it to 30% as just standard?
For the whole country. So they are going to tell you everything in the world that alcohol, I mean, you know, it'll blacken your teeth, and it'll make your hair fall out, and it'll, you know, I mean, it'll probably eat the paint on your car, and what else will it do to you? It'll make your sister pregnant. I don't know.
Yeah.
But basically, alcohol is going to be blamed for everything for a while, because that's what the propaganda campaign is fighting now.
Yeah.
The EPA mandating that we go to 30% alcohol.
Can you get drunk? Could you get drunk smelling the fumes? Maybe that one.
Oh, no, not really. You'd have
Just
to
kidding.
smell an awful lot of fumes.
Nah, yeah. I mean, well, gasoline will make you crazy, too, if you breathe the fumes off of that, obviously.
Gasoline will kill you
Yeah.
if you drink a teaspoon of it.
No, I meant just the fumes. But, yeah, that was my first job, actually, out of high school, was at a gas station. And I worked with a lot of gasoline products. Yeah, I know. I'm sure it took some years off my life.
Yeah.
So E85, E85 is that?
But think about this for a minute. Right now, we import 30% of the total oil we use in the United States from the Middle East.
Yeah.
30%. But what if we suddenly mandated 30% of our gasoline had to be alcohol? That would mean we wouldn't have to import a single drop of oil from the Middle East. Not one drop. And so that would mean we wouldn't need to have a military in the Middle East. In fact, we could tell Iraq, you guys just settle out those little disputes among yourselves. We don't need your oil. Sell it to someone else. We don't care.
Right.
In other words, we would not need to be the world's policemen just to make sure we get oil if we only replaced 30% of our gasoline with alcohol. But, of course, we could do like Brazil, where almost every car in the country runs on 95% alcohol. Brazil went on to alcohol decades ago. The assembly lines in Brazil now, almost every car in Brazil is made to be flex fuel, and pretty much everyone uses the fuel that's cheapest, which is almost always alcohol in Brazil.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask you. What's the price difference if you, like in America, if you go get some E85 compared to premium gas? What's the price point?
Well, or compare it to regular gas, which is what most people buy.
Oh, true.
I'll tell you about premium in a second, okay?
Okay.
But because comparing to premium is not fair; it's a higher price. I'd love to compare to premium, of course.
Yeah.
But you know, we're all used to like, oh gosh, you know, if I do the right thing, I'm going to have to spend more money. Like if I want to eat organic, the food's more expensive.
Yeah.
Or if I want to, you know, have green organic cotton for my sweatshirt, I'm going to have to pay more money. You know. Well, in the case of alcohol, the opposite is true. American-made alcohol right now sells at the pump for 50 cents to $1 less than gasoline. Right now.
Okay, that's good news.
So not only do you get to do the right thing, you get to save money at the same time. Now, let's get to premium. Premium costs more, 20, 25, 30 cents a gallon more. But if you have a car that needs premium, you need at least 91 octane. Well, alcohol's 105 octane.
Right.
So if you fill your car at 50% with regular and 50% with alcohol, you have about 98 octane. And so your premium needing car will be in seventh heaven if you're going 50-50 alcohol and gas, and you don't need to do a darn thing to convert the car to do that.
Do you know?
50-50.
Do you know if once you start going, let's say 50-50, does that start to clear out the carbon deposits in the car?
Absolutely. See,
it does.
Remember, we said near the earlier part of the show that gasoline has a lot of volatiles that evaporate. Most of the volatiles are stuff called benzene, toluene, and xylene.
Oh, it's toxic.
These are not beyond toxic. If someone dropped a thimbleful of benzene in a factory, alarms go off, everyone evacuates, and the guys in the moon suits come in to clean it up.
Yeah.
But you're allowed to put it in your gas tank and sit there and breathe the fumes. It's just ridiculous.
That is crazy.
It's so carcinogenic. But anyway, it evaporates really well. And so it leaves the sludge behind, the tars and varnishes, et cetera.
Yeah.
Well, if you start putting alcohol in the tank, it's going to start to dissolve those tars and varnishes.
Right.
Now, if it does it all at once, like you go cold turkey and you go 50% alcohol right away, it's going to plug up your fuel filter. Because all that stuff, big chunks of varnish and wax and gum will come off the inside of your gas tank and plug up the filter. Now, for those of you who don't understand car mechanics, that is not engine damage. That is maintenance, changing a fuel filter, okay?
Yeah.
So I go, alcohol damaged my car. No, gasoline crud plugs up your fuel filter.
Yeah.
So you got to replace it. Now, you can avoid this.
Oh.
If you do, like I said earlier, you start with 1 gallon of alcohol with this tank, 2 gallons with the next tank, it washes your tank out slowly, and everything stays liquid, and it just burns up, as your car runs. And after about 4 or 5 tanks, your whole system will be clean, and you won't have to change your fuel filter, and you might not have to change your fuel filter ever again, because alcohol will keep the filter clean all the time. Wow.
Jeez. Okay. Well, that's amazing. I'm going to have to look on your website and find out where I can start getting some of this alcohol-based fuel in my area here in New England. Do you know if there's any?
Well, what's interesting is we're our company, Blume Distillation, which is separate from our nonprofit educational, effort. We are right now in the middle of negotiating a contract to build a 2 million gallon ethanol plant or alcohol plant using fruit waste from a juice company. And we're going to sell the alcohol locally in what are called above-ground stations. Now, some of you may have seen these before. There's a tank above the ground, not underground, and then there's a pump, with a credit card swipe and just like normal, but everything is above the ground. So we're going to be the first in the United States to make alcohol locally and sell it at a pump locally as well. And we're going to do it from waste products, which, will cost us very little to make the alcohol. And there's 20,000 different food processors in the United States that have enough waste products to fund a really nice business making 500,000 or 1 million gallons of alcohol a year. And if you make the alcohol for $1 and you mark it up $1, well, people are getting alcohol for $2 plus tax, and you make $500,000 a year. So that's not a bad business, and we think a lot of people would want to go into that business and go head on head with oil companies selling gasoline for $3 and maybe next year $5 a gallon.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, next year $5 a gallon.
And why is that?
Well, the current price is being temporarily manipulated downward because of the oil companies' full-on press to try to get the renewable fuel standard overturned. And so they're trying to tell everybody, oh, you see, we're producing enough gasoline. Don't worry, it's cheap, trust us,
Uh-huh.
But, of course, once you trust them and you remove the mandate that requires them to buy alcohol, then the price goes to $5, $6, $7 a gallon like it does in the rest of the world. I've been in the Amazon, down in the Amazon in Peru, where gasoline was selling for $23 a gallon.
What?
Because, it's not. There's no roads in the Amazon, so they have to take it up there by boat and drums, and then they roll it up the side of the bank, and then people sell it in front of their house in water bottles for the motorcycles to put in the tank, and it's $23 a gallon. I've been a lot of places in the world that have been $7, $8, $9, $10 a gallon in the last couple of years. In the United States, we subsidize our gasoline with tax dollars. In other words, the best studies have shown that gasoline would be $3, $4, $5 a gallon more expensive if it wasn't for all the tax giveaways and direct grants that our government gives the oil companies. So, basically, why do they do that? Because it makes energy cheap for business.
Oh.
And you see, that makes America more competitive price-wise around the world. So they take it from our taxes and give it to our businesses, who are the bigger users of fuel than you or I would ever be. And so it's yet another, takeaway from the working class and giving it to the big corporations. And so, I got to tell you, pumping your own fuel is one of your great pleasures in life. You're really sticking it to some big corporations every time you fill your tank.
Right. So whose idea was it to use corn? I thought, wasn't sugarcane more effective?
Well, sugarcane's a great crop for making alcohol, but it doesn't grow where it freezes, which is most of the United States.
Yeah.
There's a little sugarcane growing in Florida. But corn is what we had in surplus here. Remember earlier I told you about the farmers in the 30s that couldn't get any money for their crops because they were good farmers. They had surpluses of corn and wheat. And so the same is true nowadays. Our farmers have a capacity to grow corn that is larger than the ability for the human race to use that corn. And we produce it so cheap that we feed it to cows. 90% of our corn is fed to cattle.
Yeah.
So it's not a human food at all. The oil companies did a $3 billion campaign a few years ago trying to accuse ethanol producers of food versus fuel, that we're using valuable corn to, fuel our SUVs instead of feed starving kids in Africa. But we don't feed starving kids corn in Africa. We feed it to cows in the Midwest. So does that mean the kids in Africa are eating steak? I don't think so.
No.
And so the whole thing was just based on people's lack of knowledge about agriculture, that they could pull this incredible stunt by trying to convince us that corn was somehow, going to be connected to human food. I mean, here's what we do with corn in the United States. 1% of corn is used as food for people in corn chips and breakfast cereal. 1%. Then there's about 5 or 6% of corn, up to 8% of corn, starch. Not the whole corn, not the protein, not the nutrition, just the white stuff that we make into things like modified food starch, which I would argue is not food. I mean, use it in, gunpowder, and you use it to thicken up salsa that they make in New York City, and and then we make high fructose corn syrup with that starch, which I'm telling you right now, high fructose corn syrup is not food. It's an industrial sweetener, that nobody needs. And no, there is one more human use for corn. 1% of our corn is made into whiskey, and I always do maintain that is food. But other than that, it's animal feed. And so animals can eat a lot of things, but they can't eat all the corn that we produce. It's just way more than we can export and at a cheap price for European cattle and feed our own cattle. So, but the thing is, even that is bogus to use as an argument, because cattle can't digest starch. Starch is the stuff we make alcohol out of. It's a carbohydrate, right?
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide and water. Carbohydrate. Now, cows can't really digest starch at all. They like the corn for the protein and the fat and the minerals. When we make alcohol, we only use the starch, the part that the animals can't use. So the byproduct that's left over is called distiller's grains. And, of course, the moonshiners used to call it sour mash. And you feed that to the animals instead of the original corn. Well, lo and behold, they actually gain more weight than if they ate the original corn because the starch is not in the way. And so not only, like any good propaganda, not only is the opposite true, in other words, if you want more meat from corn, you first have to ferment it and make alcohol to get the starch out of the way. So, not only is the opposite true, not only is the propaganda false, but the opposite turns out to be true, that if we wanted more meat, we'd have to ferment all the corn before we feed it to our animals. And what is a cow's stomach? Well, it's 4 fermentation tanks inside that old bossy there,
Yeah.
A whole bunch of organisms eating on the corn and fermenting it, to make it usable by the cow, but none of those fermentation organisms work on starch.
Mm-hmm. Wow,
so,
that's crazy.
Yeah, we've been sold a complete bill of goods on this food versus fuel thing, and it's the magnitude of the lies that the oil companies have the money to propagate that's just amazing in the face of the fact that 100 years of running alcohol and the whole country of Brazil running on it, people don't know. They have no idea.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, it's by design. That's infuriating that this has been going on so long.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that you're angry, because most people sit there and they're looking at their TV and they're going, oh, yeah, look what they're wearing on Dancing with the Stars again. And it's like they just totally don't pay attention to the important things in their lives,
Yeah.
People are dying in the Middle East right now so that we can protect access to something we don't even need. We don't need the oil. If we went ahead and produced alcohol here from sensible crops, not corn. But corn is a surplus. We're using it because we have extra. But what if we did things like grew, like they used to do up in the upper Midwest, fodder beets or sugar beets, where you get 1,000 gallons an acre from beets, and 4 times the animal feed that you would get from corn. The pulp left over is great animal feed. What about sweet sorghum that is used to make blackstrap molasses? That's another 1,200 gallons per acre compared to corn's 300.
Right.
We can even take cattails, the marsh plant that looks like a hot dog on a stick. You've all seen it in ditches by the side of the road. Years ago, I was part of a team that invented sewage treatment using cattails to clean the water, and the starch in cattails can be made into alcohol in sufficient quantity. If we processed all the human poop in this country into cattails, we'd replace all the gasoline and diesel in use today. And, one thing about poop, it's truly renewable. If we ever run out of poop, there's some serious problems going on.
Wait a minute, I know it makes methane gas, but how is that transferable to alcohol?
Well, what is poop? It's nothing but surplus fertilizer, right?
Yeah.
Like fertilizer no one's figured out a good use for. Well, if cattails grow in standing water, so if you flow the partially treated sewage through the cattail marsh, it absorbs all the nutrients out of it before you release it into the nearest river or the ocean.
Okay. So you're actually cleaning up the environment while you're growing your fuel.
I never do anything for one reason. Nature never does either.
Yeah.
My background as an ecologist, and in nature we learned that nature's always doing things for 3 or 4 reasons and depending on 3 or 4 other things to do it. It's the multiple connections between things that really make systems work. So, for instance, let's say I take corn and I make alcohol with it.
Right.
Well, I've got all this high-protein grain left over. So let's say I take some of it, and it's nice and sterile. I just cooked the heck out of it when I distilled it, and I put it in bags with some mushroom fungus. And so now the fungus grows in there, and in 2 weeks, these mushrooms come pouring out. So now I have high-protein mushrooms to feed people. Or I take some of the grain that's come out of the still, and I pelletize it, and I feed it to fish. Well, the fish, go ahead and eat the corn mixture, and they poop out some of it, but most of it turns into fish meat. Instead of taking 10 pounds of corn to make a pound of cow, it only takes 1.5 pounds of distiller's grains to make a pound of fish. And that's why they call them fish, because they're more efficient. But
good one. Did you? Did you do? Really? You made that?
Oh well, I might have made that one up.
Yeah. Okay.
So and now when you ferment the corn to make alcohol, well, fermentation, bubbles and pops and sputters, and it makes carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
So some of the sugar becomes alcohol, which is yeast poop, and then part of the sugar becomes carbon dioxide. Now, if you have vegetables growing in a greenhouse on your farm and you put that carbon dioxide into the greenhouse, plants like it. See, plants are not like us. Plants breathe carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen, which is a good thing because we need oxygen. So if you do that in a greenhouse, you can triple the output. And if you've got all this extra heat left over from, the hot water and stuff used in making alcohol, you can keep. And Archer Daniels Midland used to do this. They had 5 acres of greenhouse in the middle of Decatur, Illinois, nice and toasty in there, raising lettuce and cucumbers and tilapia and shrimp and all this stuff, using the byproducts of making alcohol fuel. And those byproducts make some real money compared to the alcohol, which is just kind of okay. The real money is in the byproducts.
Good Lord.
So you're talking about suddenly in the middle of Decatur, you got, 50, 100 people working around these 5 greenhouses making all these products, and all of a sudden, well, you don't have such an unemployment problem anymore in this rural town.
Right.
And if you're the guy doing this yourself, you're running an alcohol plant, you're making fish and vegetables and all of that in your greenhouses, and everybody's working for you, well, then when it comes time for an election, they elect you mayor, and then you really cause trouble.
Yeah, because you become self-sustainable at some point from what you're telling me.
Well, you become regionally interdependent. The self-sustainable thing, it raises up images of Ted Kaczynski out in the woods with his gun,
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not what we want. What we want is regional interdependence, We have people out there who are farmers and they grow the crops for the alcohol, and then there's other people who run the fish operation and the mushroom operation and the vegetables and the all kinds of things we can do with an alcohol plant other than just make alcohol. And suddenly we're not buying that stuff from overseas anymore.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's not full of toxic stuff that nobody labels because, well, why would we want to work in a greenhouse full of toxic stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Archer Daniels Midland guys, they wouldn't spray any pesticides in their greenhouse. They had beneficial bugs in there to keep all the bad guys off the lettuce they were growing because, they look around and go, let's see, greenhouse, 4 walls, fixed air supply. Spray pesticides in here? Oh, no, don't think so. So, you're talking about the ability to have good jobs for people that make good money and local money,
Right.
Not something that has to be exported to another country.
Yeah, that's what I meant by self-sustainable. It's that community is sustaining itself, not just one person, but a group of effort there. Once you get it, if you followed the blueprint you just laid out, seems like it would be sustainable.
Well, not just sustainable, it's regenerative. In other words, that capital that gets created by local production of fuel gets recirculated in the community.
Right.
Let's say you had an alcohol plant, okay, and I came to you and I wanted some alcohol, so I gave you some of my money. Now, you take some of that money and you go to your engineer who you want him to build you a little pirate radio station for your little farm community way out in the middle of nowhere. And so you give him some of the alcohol money. Well, after a hard day of soldering back there, he decides, he wants to go on out and get a massage, and so he takes your alcohol money and goes gets a back rub,
Yeah.
And then the massage therapist says, I'm doing so well, I want to have a separate entrance for my massage studio. So she goes hires a carpenter with that same alcohol money. And so gets a door put in. And then the carpenter says, well, I think I need to get my car tuned up. And the mechanic gets some of the alcohol money. And then the mechanic says, I've got a real hankering for tilapia tonight. So he comes back to your farm and buys fish from you and gives you the money back. And you started circulating again.
Right.
So each of those transactions is a transaction that did not leave the community.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you go to Walmart, they have a sign on the wall that says 5% of our profits return to the community. Well, just how stupid do they think we are? What that sign really says is 95% of your money is exported to Arkansas overnight. We don't even leave it in your local bank.
Yeah.
You're talking about creating resilient, flexible, healthy economies in local regions versus everything being scattered all over the globe and corporations being able to hire the cheapest labor to do the worst job to get, and use an oil to transport it to you. It's like we got to put an end to this. And the only way to put an end to transnational capitalism, by the way, I'm not against capitalism. I think small-scale capitalism is just grand.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to get rid of transnational capitalism, you got to stop giving them your capital.
Yeah.
So that means you need viable businesses locally. And from where I'm sitting, the two things that are core to our taking control over of our communities again are both food and energy. We need to make those locally, and we need to make them organic, and we need to make them from things that are not toxic.
Right.
Alcohol is edible. What can I say?
Well, it's also breathable from what you're telling me about the exhaust. And the other things about it just absolutely make me think that it's suicidal not to go down this route that you're proposing here, or actually that some people are already doing.
Well, what's suicidal is going after the things the oil companies would have us go after. It's like it doesn't matter if there's all huge sea of oil underneath Newt Gingrich's house or something. It's like it doesn't matter because we can't burn it. If we burn it, we are going to change the weather. We're going to change the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. We're going to change the balance of plants and animals on the planet. The North Pole is already melted. The ice of the North Pole is gone most years. It's like we can't ignore the fact that when you burn stuff and stick it in the air, it causes changes. Think about it this way. Buckminster Fuller taught me this, 30 years ago. He said if you take a stainless steel ball, so imagine a bowling ball about the size of a bowling ball, stainless steel, polished like a mirror. And think of that as the size of the earth. Now, if you went up to that ball and you breathed on it, and a little film of fog was, from your breath is on that nice stainless steel ball, the thickness of that fog on the ball is the total thickness of the atmosphere on the planet, including the crust of the planet. So when you got this little mist on the ball and you start pumping burning crap into it, it's not like there's this infinite volume of air to pump stuff into. It's just a little skim on the outside of the planet. And so it's really delicate. If the Earth, just turned a little bit slower,
mm-hmm.
then it would change the temperatures all over the planet, and that atmosphere would boil away. If it turned faster, we wouldn't absorb enough heat, and we'd have ice everywhere.
Right.
So, it's a miracle that we're here, and if you start pumping a bunch of crud into the atmosphere, you get what you deserve. So, people say, oh, Dave, you're an ecologist. That means, you favor nature over people. I say, no, you don't get it. We're part of nature, and ecologists are just trying to keep enough of nature around so people can survive.
Yeah.
Nature nature's trying very hard to help us survive, but we are not the only experiment.
Right, right.
If we blow it and we're gone, well, there's rats and cockroaches, and everybody else gets a turn, But we ecologists are trying to keep things healthy so that human beings can continue to live here. And so with alcohol, we get a healthy economy. We get healthy people from not breathing horrible stuff. And we're talking about taking the power back because it's liquid solar energy. Solar energy is democratic. It falls everywhere, equally, pretty much. And so why do I say it's liquid solar energy? Well, if you take a plant and it is growing, it does what's called photosynthesis. So, big word, what it means is it makes carbohydrates. I said it earlier, carbo means carbon dioxide, hydrate means water. So when we make a sugar or a starch, a carbohydrate, we're making out carbon dioxide from the air, water, and the plant uses solar energy to glue those two things together into sugars. When we ferment the sugar and make alcohol, and we burn the alcohol, what goes out the tailpipe is carbon dioxide and water, the same two things that went in to make the carbohydrate. What drives the car down the road is the exploding solar energy in the engine. Remember, it's just three things: solar energy, carbon dioxide, and water. That's what makes alcohol. The carbon dioxide and water that goes out in the exhaust is exactly the same amount needed to make next year's energy crop, to make next year's fuel. It's a cycle. We release carbon dioxide and water. We absorb carbon dioxide and water with our plants. That's not true of fossil fuels. It's not true of gasoline or diesel or any of that stuff, because when you burn that, it releases carbon dioxide and water into the atmosphere, but in no way does gasoline or diesel absorb any new carbon dioxide or water out of the atmosphere. So we're just adding to the atmosphere all the time. Plants give us oxygen, and in return for the carbon dioxide, we get a balance out of it. And so it seems only neighborly that we support photosynthesis, since we need to breathe air. We need to breathe oxygen.
Yeah, well, all living things do. It's not just us, right?
Well, that's true. But I guess I was appealing to those who think that ecologists are just for spotted owls and not for people. What I'm trying to say is, we're just saying that it's really about us, and the other animals are indicators that things are getting screwy, and it might be bad for us if we don't take care of things. So
clearly,
it's just our job. We come here, we leave in 70, 80 years. The Earth is, really old, and basically we leave it to our kids. And it's like, why would we trash something we're leaving for our kids?
Yeah.
It's like you got to be a corporation to think that way. You got to be a corporation that just thinks about what's the profit at the end of this quarter. That kind of short-sightedness. That's not gonna serve us for very much longer. You can't keep burning fossil fuels and get away with it. And where they're going next is horrible. We're already the biggest source of so-called oil for the United States is tar sands from Canada. It is not oil from Saudi Arabia. It is not oil from Iraq. It's goo from sand in Canada, which they have to go through many processes to even make into usable crude oil.
Right.
And then it's actually illegal now for us to use it in the United States. So they want to build a pipeline from Canada to the Gulf and then refine it at the Gulf and then ship it out of the United States.
Wow.
The tar sands that they want to bring down, it's like they say, it's all about energy independence. It's all about oil company profit because there's too much sulfur in it to sell in the United States. So they trade that oil for oil from somewhere else, which is less filthy, so we get to pollute someone else's country instead.
Wow.
It's the stuff is not usable. It's just not usable, and we should not be messing with it. The next step after that is oil shale, which is mostly in the Rocky Mountains, where they would shear off, like they do in West Virginia for coal, big chunks of the Rocky Mountains to get at this oil shale, which is even worse than tar sands, and they have to burn it to get the coal-like oil out of it to make into gasoline. This stuff is like science fiction. You're talking $200, $250, $300 a barrel, and they're counting on nothing replacing it in time, and we will have to foot the tab.
God.
It's just, luckily we're up to this task, I mean, you could take a look at the guy. There was a show on recently, a couple of years ago. It was kind of a funny show about moonshiners, and they were on TV.
Yeah.
And you look at those guys and you go, I'm as smart as he is. I mean, this is not rocket science, making alcohol. It's a little biology and it's a little physics, but, people have been doing this since forever. And we've learned how to get really good at it, and my company now is building distilleries for people to go into the small business of making alcohol for their communities. And a lot of our customers, actually, are going to be people in other countries, because in other countries, like, say, in most of Africa or Latin America, there's only one car for every 15 or 20 people.
Yeah.
People don't drive.
Right.
They use buses, etc. So why do they need alcohol? Well, it turns out about half the world, that's 3.5 billion people if you were counting, cook their food over wood or kerosene every night. In other words, they have a fire.
Yeah.
And that fire is indoors.
Oof.
Imagine that. Imagine breathing all that wood smoke indoors, because outside it's raining.
Yeah.
And so here you are all throughout the tropics, people are cooking indoors, breathing wood smoke all day. Well, not everybody, because who cooks the food? Well, it's the moms, and then the kids running around the moms.
Yeah.
So they're the ones who breathe the wood smoke all day, and 5 million women a year die from breathing wood smoke from cooking.
Wow.
It's a staggering number. And why should cooking end up killing you? It's ridiculous. Now, we have a stove that is made by a company in Sweden, very inexpensive, runs on alcohol. It makes no pollution whatsoever. You can run that stove in the house all day, no problems whatsoever. It just gives off carbon dioxide and water, the same thing the kids are breathing out.
Yeah.
So, and people don't have to cut down trees to go ahead and cook. Most people don't realize this. It's not timber companies that are causing the world's deforestation. Deforestation is caused by human beings trying to cook their food. Far, far, far more wood is consumed in cooking than in making timber. And in fact, in some countries, like I was recently in Nicaragua, where they were saying that of the total energy used by the country, electric, diesel, gasoline, everything, out of the total energy the country used, 45% of it was wood for cooking.
Wow.
Okay, and that's normal. That's normal around the world in the great majority of countries. So if we want to stop deforestation, which would be a good thing, because remember, we like to breathe oxygen,
yep.
that good stuff that's good to breathe. Well, trees make it, and we don't want to cut down all the trees just to cook food, because then the machinery of making oxygen is gone when you get rid of the trees.
Right.
So if you grow a little crop of cassava or, sugar cane or whatever in your village so that you can ferment it, you distill it, you make the alcohol for the stoves. Now people don't have to walk 6 hours each way to bring 100 pounds of wood home to cook their meal that week. They can actually stay home and farm and make their own fuel right in their own village.
But doesn't it take some heat in order to do the distillation process? Wouldn't they have to use wood for that? Or you're saying there's a solar way to do it?
Well, of course, wood is solar, just like alcohol is solar. I mean, wood is carbohydrate. It's just cellulose. But no, not wood. What you say, let's say you use sugar cane, okay? So it's a giant grass. It's like a grass that's like 2 or 3 inches in diameter and 10 feet tall.
Right.
Well, you run it through a couple of rollers to juice it, to squeeze the sugary juice out, and that's what you make the alcohol from. But all that fiber that's left over, that's what you would use for the heat.
Oh, really? You burn that?
From the distillery, yeah.
I didn't know that.
So, you're not cutting a tree down, you're cutting grass down to do it.
Interesting.
Grass, super fast growing. And so and then you take the ash that's left over from burning that sugar cane, fiber,
Yeah.
and you spread it back on the land because that's all the mineral nutrients
Yep.
that came from the soil,
Right.
and you just put it back where it's supposed to be.
Wow.
So even on the very smallest of scales, this makes a lot of sense. But yeah, there's really no reason to be. We are smart enough monkeys to stop cutting down trees to cook. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
And the equipment it takes to do this is reasonable in cost. Yes, a villager couldn't afford to buy it. The World Bank or someone else would, put up the few $100,000 for the still. But then, it gets paid back in health benefits that the country doesn't have to deal with, and infant mortality drops. It gets paid back in carbon credits. It gets paid back in, health. It's like there's many ways it gets paid back, but it gets paid back in money, too, because people don't get this wood for free.
Mm-hmm.
Once they cut down the wood near their village, well, now people go out there with burros or horses and cut wood farther away and bring it back and sell it. And people cook with charcoal, which is reduced wood, in cities. I mean, I was in the Amazon, a city of Iquitos, a city of 500,000.
Yeah.
There's no natural gas there or electricity for people to cook. They're cooking over charcoal in their apartment.
Wow.
That's the world as it really is. So, yes, wood is renewable, and wood is toxic as heck to cook over.
Yeah.
So alcohol solves that problem as well. And we think about half the distilleries that our company will be making will be sold to countries to replace cooking fuel, not running vehicles. But, of course, alcohol is used to make electricity, runs generators.
Right.
In countries like Ethiopia, over 100 million people in Ethiopia. And for those of you who haven't been keeping up on your math, that's about a third of the size of the United States in population. Okay, a third of 1 out of 3 people, basically, of the United States. Now,
Right.
That country has no electrical grid whatsoever, not even the smallest bit of it. So when you need electricity, like you're a hotel, well, you buy a big old generator to run your hotel. If you're a little store owner in a little village in the back of Africa, you have a little tiny generator to light your store, run your refrigerator. So millions and millions of generators are made every year all around the world for all these places that don't have a grid.
Mm-hmm.
Grid, we take it for granted here. It's only in the most developed countries do you have a grid. And a lot of countries that do have some grids, like I mentioned Nicaragua earlier,
Yeah.
only 60% of the people are covered by the grid. The rest of the people are outside of the grid.
Yeah.
So alcohol allows them to make electricity. Now, gosh, let's say you're diabetic and you have to have insulin in your village, for your patients that are, diabetic. It has to be refrigerated. Well, it turns out alcohol can be used to run a refrigerator without electricity. Albert Einstein invented the alcohol refrigerator back in the early 30s. But just having electricity for basic things requires some kind of fuel, and alcohol can be made locally, right where these villages are. Now, like in Ethiopia, it rains like all get out for quite a few months a year. There are no roads to 60% of the villages in Ethiopia. So you don't even have the choice of delivering diesel fuel to these places. So, and this is not unusual in this world of ours today. But in fact, after hours, when it gets dark, well, a lot of people in this world just go to sleep because it's dark.
Yeah.
But what we nowadays call kerosene lanterns, those originally were alcohol lanterns. The glass bowl with the wick,
Yeah.
and the glass chimney. Those work on alcohol just fine. If you put a couple of drops of tree sap in with the alcohol, turpentine,
Uh-huh.
it makes a beautiful yellow flame, and you can read by it. And you're talking about people being able to educate themselves after dark.
Oh, yeah, because you said that the flame is pretty much invisible.
It is, and so it doesn't choke up your entire little one-room house with smoke and soot and everything else like a kerosene lantern would.
Yes.
Alcohol is perfectly clean. So the original, like I said, the original lanterns were all alcohol, and then later on people figured out you could put kerosene in them. Now, it was a really bad idea to put the volatile stuff from gasoline in one of those lanterns, Glass bowl, wick, you go to light that, boom, there goes your house. And so that's why Rockefeller used to flush the volatile stuff from making kerosene into rivers at night to get rid of it.
What?
So, and of course, rivers would catch on fire and all that. But basically, later on, the use of that volatile stuff for gasoline got him out of trouble from dumping his stuff into rivers at night.
Wow. What a crazy planet we live on. But, you give me hope. You give me hope from what you're telling me here. It sounds like we could do this. This has nothing to do with politics, right? Nothing to do with religion. It's something that anybody can do anytime, anywhere, if they choose to, right?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, Alcohol Can Be a Gas.
Yeah.
It's a book that's kind of a toolbox for people who want to know anything related at all to using alcohol, making alcohol, growing crops for alcohol. Your library probably has it. If they don't, ask them for it. Alcohol Can Be a Gas. You can also go to our website of the same name, and we do sell the book there too. But I would keep it right up there with my, collection of all the Mother Earth News magazines and the Foxfire books and any other carpentry or design book I have about doing things for real. But there's more to it than that because, the economy and ecology come from the same root. The root eco is home. And so our home is a web of connections between, the economy, each other, nature. And so in the book, Alcohol Can Be a Gas, what I try to point out is energy is central to our current modern lives. And it reaches out into everything we do and every decision we make. And so we have to decide to choose life, or we can choose the dark path of fossil fuels and extinct ourselves. It's really up to us.
Yeah.
And that is refreshing because I remember years ago there were a bunch of authors running around talking about peak oil.
Right.
Oh, oil's going to run out and food will stop coming to the supermarkets and people will start, looting and hoarding and you better buy a big gun. And it's like, whoa, chill out. We're basically, pretty good beings, as human beings. And, given half a chance, we actually will work together and solve problems. We just need the information and then we can figure out who does what and get it done. And so, what we're seeing is people wanting to go into the alcohol business. Other people are wanting to grow energy crops. In other countries, we're finding people who are wanting to build alcohol stoves. This whole movement is not real visible in the United States, but in the rest of the world, everyone else knows that the United States is not going to let their country, this other country, anywhere near any of the oil.
Right.
It's like we're going to keep it all for ourselves. And so the rest of the world is just, they're resigned to that fact, and so they're saying, well, what do we do next? And they're all going to alcohol. Sweden, right? You think, oh, Sweden, they're a big developed country.
Yeah.
They expect to be off of fossil fuels by 2020.
Wow.
They are kicking butt. They have alcohol stations throughout the entire country. They're working on turning sea plants, where it's kelp.
Yeah.
I don't know if any live near a coast, but, macro algae, the stuff that grows 10 inches a day,
right.
Well, that's a carbohydrate too, and Norwegian fishermen used to get drunk off their butts, drinking kelp whiskey. So there they are up in Norway, figuring out how to use kelp to make alcohol because it's one of the fastest growing plants on Earth. There's so many ways we can go about this, and the beauty of it is it can't be patented because, making alcohol is mankind's second oldest profession. It's like it's pretty hard to find something to patent about it and control it. It's really the people's technology. And as you know from seeing pictures of moonshiners in Kentucky, you're as smart as those guys. So, but it is true that there's been a diminishing number of people who understand the physical world. I mean, when I went to college and I went to high school, I learned how to weld, I learned how to fix my own car, I learned how to do carpentry. And nowadays, it's not so common anymore that people have a lot of manual skills. But that's okay because other people do, and you don't have to build your own still, which is what my book shows you how to do. There are others that can build it for you, and that's what we're doing now. In fact, my first round of investors got us over $2 million to design and build the kind of still that people could run in their own small business in their community. And we got all of our engineering done, and we've got something that's really just super, in terms of using new technology and stuff. And we hope in the coming year to be able to start delivering distilleries to people who want to start these small businesses in their communities, where they might fuel 1,000 cars, or 2,000 cars, and or really pickup trucks. I mean, gosh, the mileage pickup trucks get is scandalous. But at least pickup trucks are working. That fuel is being used to produce something,
right?
Rather than move people around. But yes, we're getting calls from around the world now, and in fact, I'll be going to Europe in January because we're at our second round of financing, and people in Europe want to participate in this revolution and help us get this company going out there where it can help mostly people in the developing countries. There's more of a philanthropic ethic in Europe about, if you really want to stop global warming, well, you got to help people stop burning trees. They think a few more steps down the road maybe than people on TV do here. I mean, here they're wondering what color nail polish they should wear to the prom or whatever on TV. I don't know what they do on TV anymore, but it's not pay attention to the issues.
Yeah.
And it would seem that although we, all of our investors right now, except for one, are Americans, we're happy to make this more of an international effort, and that's what we're doing now. So you can find out more about Blume Distillation by just going to our website, Blume, B-L-U-M-E, distillation.com, or you can just go to the Alcohol Can Be a Gas website, and you'll find your way over to Blume Distillation easy enough.
Very good. Hey, Dave, before you go, I wanted to ask you about buses or mass transportation or like trucking. There's so many places where diesel is the standard. Is there a way to switch over there?
Oh, yeah. Well, in Sweden, a company named Scania has been making city buses for 30 years that run on pure alcohol, and they have a diesel-like engine in them. I've converted all kind of diesel engines to alcohol. It's a little more complex than gasoline. Gasoline, as I said, is very simple, or you can run 50% without any changes on gasoline. But diesel is a little more touchy, but they're not very expensive to convert, really. Mercedes-Benz back in the 80s demonstrated a vaporized alcohol engine, and those Mercedes buses ran all over Auckland, New Zealand for about 20 years. So they evaporated or boiled the alcohol using heat from the exhaust, and then the vaporized alcohol was through a propane-type carburetor or a natural gas-type carburetor, went into the engine and ran those diesel buses just fine, and they just ran and ran and ran and ran, for like 25 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, I've converted big diesel generators to run on alcohol, jet engines to run on alcohol, locomotive turbines to run on alcohol. It all runs on alcohol.
Wow. That's really amazing. That's amazing.
So, and the thing is, there's no one can control the production of alcohol. It's totally open source, technology. And really, There's a lot of information on our website about alcohol that you can learn about these things at alcoholcanbeagas.com. And keep an eye out because we might be doing some workshops this upcoming year. We have a new piece of land we bought in California, which historically was called Whiskey Hill, which we think is appropriate, in Freedom, California. And I like to say every day I live in freedom.
Awesome.
So, but anyway, we will be having workshops out here later in the year in alcohol production with full-size distilling equipment, and we'll be growing all those crops I mentioned in our greenhouses. We have a lot of glass greenhouses left over from the flower industry, so we'll be growing fish and mushrooms and vegetables and you name it, using the byproducts of alcohol fuel here. So it's going to be a pretty exciting place starting this upcoming summer.
Great.
So if you want more information about that, you can, if you don't like to use the internet, you can give us a call at, it's toll-free at 888-737-6228. And otherwise, give us a holler at info@alcoholcanbeagas.com, and you can get on the mailing list for when we're going to have workshops in making alcohol.
Wow, that's great, David. Thank you. I really appreciate your time tonight, and also what you're doing for the world every day. That's fantastic.
You know, I'm only doing my part.
Mm.
Everyone who's listening to this today, they can do their part.
Yeah.
Go to my website, find out where the local alcohol station is, and I mean it with the bottom of my heart. You go tomorrow and buy a gallon of alcohol at one of those stations and put it in your tank. Taking action.
Yeah.
I can help with information. You need to take the action. That's how we win.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. One step at a time. Thank you, David.
See you later.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Wow. Okay. I'm sold. I mean, it didn't take much to sell me on that, actually. It's just such a great idea. No, it's not just a great idea. It's very empowering. Very, very truthful and helpful. And, yeah, I'm excited about this. I'll tell you, I really am. So, I'm actually going to post this show on YouTube. I really think more people need to have access to this information. So rather than just keep it in my archive, I think that's what I'm going to do. And I hope, people that listen to this show are actually going to get some benefit from it. Okay, well, that concludes another episode of the Unicus Radio Hour. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Tomorrow night will be my interview follow-up with Dr. J talking about schizophrenia and the voices that people hear from other dimensions. So until next time, good night and God bless.